Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 11th January 2021, and these are the issues that we'll be discussing today. This article is taken from the Live Mint and it is titled A 4-Point Agenda for Indian Banking in the Post-COVID World. Now, if you have to understand the scenario of banking, ever since the NDA government, that is Prime Minister Modi's government, has come to power in 2014, and after Raghuram Rajan has warned the banking system that rising NPAs is a big threat to the existence of banking in our country. So, in this scenario, from the past few years, there has been a renewed emphasis on non performing assets. There were multiple reforms over a period of last 5 years as well with respect to recapitalization of banks. Just before the pandemic has struck our economy was witnessing a economic slowdown. There was a very slow credit growth rate, that is the number of people who were taking loans has significantly slowed down, and the pandemic has only made the situation even worse. Just to put things into context, for the banks in the previous year, there was a rough 9% return on the equity that they have. Now that has fallen to 1.5%. In this context, you have to understand an important scenario called provisioning. Provisioning means in order to handle the risks associated with non-performing assets, a certain percentage of amount is kept aside and it is not lent by banks, so that in the case of a failure of that particular loan, say for example, if a person has taken 100 rupees loan and has defaulted on this payment, a certain amount of that, say 10%, according to the risk profile of that candidate, this percentage will be fixed, and 10% of 100 rupees or the amount taken by that person will be set aside. So only 41% of the loans were covered previously, and in the past few years this number has been increased over a period of time and has reached 65%. So 65% of the loans are covered with enough provisioning, which is a safety measure for the banks in this time of crisis. Even if they fail completely, 65% of the loans will be more or less secure. In this context, you have to understand the importance of Basel norms. In Basel norms, one of the most important ratio that we have to keep in mind is the capital adequacy ratio. Capital adequacy ratio is one such factor which is making the entire difference. According to Basel norms 3, 9% capital adequacy should be enough for any bank to be called sustainable or to allow lending. So this 9% capitalization is what we are aiming for. In the recent years, the recapitalization of banks has increased significantly before the pandemic struck us. So we are in a better position even on this prospect. So what are the 4 things that the economy and banking in particular should focus upon? First one is about costs. So they have to cut down the costs of sourcing money. That is the first priority. And productivity. They have to significantly cut down the costs involved in the factors of work that are involved in the administration of these banks. So productivity must increase. This will lead to increase in efficiency. The next thing with respect to banking that is equally important is identifying risks. If a particular bank notices that there is a chance of a loan to fail, it should warn the relevant stakeholders in the due process of time. Otherwise, if this is not taken care of, they might end up as NPAs. So a real-time tracking of the risk profiles of various borrowers is equally important. And for this, we come to the next point of our agenda, that is capacity building, especially in the form of digital technology. So with the advent of digital technology and with the rise in number of electronic transactions, especially because of technologies like UPI, we are now in a scenario where we have billions of transactions in a single month. So this gives us a leverage to use technology and identify various parameters that can help in deciding the risk profiles of various candidates. So these are the 4 points that are very important in the present scenario for the post pandemic world. If we take care of all these aspects, our administration will eventually move towards a very cost effective capital and become accessible for startups as well. This will usher in a new phase in our economy. Therefore, a robust banking system is a prerequisite for economic growth in our country in the post pandemic world. That is what this article is trying to say. This article taken from the Indian Express titled Farm Protest Big Picture. So this article is trying to explain the various issues of agriculture and much beyond the MSP, which are meant to be addressed in the immediate short term and how they will reflect in the long term. So the first point that you have to note here is the agricultural census. Till now, the entire rhetoric has been surrounded around legalizing MSP, but that is not the only issue that agriculture faces right now. First of all, we have to talk about the area that is under agriculture. If you take a look at the last decade, the average size of a land holding has reduced from 1.2 hectare to 1.08 hectare. This might seem like a very small amount, but on a pan India level, it is a very significant change. Agricultural census shows us that 5 states together comprise most of the farmers that live in India. Since we don't have exact data on how many farmers are there in our country, we are using the proxy of number of land holdings as a measure of farmers. Even by this measure, we have nearly 14.6 crore farmers. But there is one shortcoming in this data as well. We don't know the exact amount of agricultural laborers who are working in this. And another important statistic is that 86% of our country has small and marginal farmers. And these small and marginal farmers just handle around 47.35% of the entire land. So what this signifies is the rest 14% hold nearly 53% of the entire land. So this land is a major factor of production, and access of this land has been denied to a lot of communities, and this inequity is reflecting in agriculture as well. The second important aspect that we have to consider as an implication for this statistic, when 86% of the farmers are small and marginal, the yields that they have is very low. So as a result, what happens is, if they produce 1 quintal or some 100 quintals, the cost incurred on transportation is an additional burden on them. And after they take the produce to the markets, if they don't get a proper price, they have a fear of extra burden of transportation, and they are forced to sell their produce at farm gates itself. So this is the problem of agriculture, especially with respect to small and marginal farmers. Another important criticism is the fact that Punjab is the only benefactor of the MSP regime, and rest of the states don't have access to this MSP. But if we take a look at sugarcane, we will have a completely different picture. Wheat and rice are accused of being water guzzling crops, that is, they are not efficient in respect to the amount of water they need for cultivation. In comparison, sugarcane needs just 25% of the water that a rice or paddy field needs. This is an oversimplification. This number depends on region to region. For example, if we take the case of Maharashtra, this number will increase to 50%. And yet 70% of the irrigated water or the facility for irrigation is used up by sugarcane crops alone because of the assured quality or magnitude of marketing for sugarcane. If you compare that with Punjab's case, Punjab does not have so much area under sugarcane. They majorly depend on wheat and rice. So the accusation that Punjab alone is promoting unsustainable practices is not completely true according to the view of the author. Government has taken certain steps, like say in the case of example of pulses, through NAFED they have procured a lot of pulses. Similarly, when we talk about the small farmer agribusiness consortium SFAC, even they maintain a buffer stock of nearly 2 million tons for pulses. Similarly, when we are talking about the next crop, that is cotton, cotton is procured by Cotton Corporation of India, while groundnut is procured in some states like Gujarat. Another issue is uh, since horticulture and dairy crops are much more profitable than the MSP crops, there is an accusation that due to populist policies, the farmers are afraid to move towards horticulture and dairy. But we have to understand that just like in every other business, if it is in the best interest of the farmer would obviously move towards horticulture and dairy. But there are a lot of fluctuations even in the milk prices. When we are looking at milk, we have a famous example in the form of Gujarat, where Amul cooperative dairies have contributed to stability of income for milk farmers. But that is not the scenario across the country. Even milk producers have a lot of fluctuations and have to depend upon state support. That is why MSP is considered to be a safe bet in a lot of regions. Another important aspect here is it is often said that the Indian farmer is taxed or net taxed. Now, does it mean that agricultural income is taxable in our country? Agriculture income is not taxable. What the author means here in this case is, in India, when we talk about input side and the output side in agriculture, we give input subsidies in the form of fertilizers, seeds, etc. And we also in some states give subsidy in the form of transportation in some states, and also for the post harvest mechanisms we give certain subsidies for happy seeder machines in states like Haryana, etc. But we also give MSP, fair and remunerative price for sugarcane, and all sort of provisions are available. However, what this actually signifies is that despite having such mechanisms, the cost of input is still higher than the output revenue generated. This results in fall in agricultural incomes, making it a net taxed commodity or a net taxed business. So, where is the problem? If you take a look at the agricultural scenario, we can start with inputs. We are giving subsidies for fertilizers and seeds, etc. But are we really focusing upon the efficiency of this cost incurred, or are we focusing on research and technology? We hardly spend around 0.6 to 0.7% of our GDP on R&D. That is simply insufficient for any sort of agricultural growth in our country. Therefore, our focus should be to ensure that the costs of R&D are borne by the government. That is in a way a support given to the farmers. And on the output side, to increase their revenue, what we have to do is build a formidable transport system, a efficient warehousing technologies, and technically equipped storage houses which are very efficient and affordable, at the same time accessible. They should not be far away from farmer's place or far away from a market, so that they remain cost effective as well. So these are the basic fundas in understanding what comprises a successful agricultural business. If you compare it with a lot of countries like OECD countries, the subsidies given to farmers are not in the form of direct benefit transfers to buy the inputs. Rather, they focus on high yielding varieties and increasing the efficacy of the inputs in increasing the output of a unit area. That should be the focus going forward, and a scientific approach is needed for this. So, apart from increasing the R&D services, we also have to step up, and the center should partner with states to come up with formidable extension services to provide scientific knowledge to our farmers, who normally have a better understanding about farms through experience. Scientific knowledge can add on to their existing values, and it only happens when there is effective communication. So we have to establish those communication channels, use information and communication technology, allow the participation of private sector in increasing the efficacy of price discovery, and go towards data gathering to ensure predictive analytics play a positive role in getting the right kind of price discovery somewhere down the line. That is the future that we have to envisage for our agricultural markets. That is the gist of this article.